All right, Rebecca, as I promised, I'm going to do a video just telling you a little bit about my YWAM experiences. And I guess to give you a preface, I'd say um, life before my YWAM, I'd say led up to my YWAM, if that makes sense. In a lot of ways, I had different faith journeys, be it Camp Caroline and other things like just joining the church and being a regular attender there, that had led me to a conclusion that I needed more. Like I needed more of an answer, and I figured what better way than to kind of get out to a place where I was away from the familiarity of routine in my home life. It's not that I didn't do anything bad, but I did nothing productive in a lot of ways. I was very big into video gaming and other things that just kind of they didn't help me move toward a direction of making any conclusions on the bigger questions of life. So I'd say just by having the ability to kind of get out of my comfort zone, get away from home and all the comfortable routine that came with that there, and getting into a place that's very God-centered, maybe I would find answers, maybe I would be able to kind of focus and hone in on God and hear what He had to say for me in my life. So getting to YWAM was really cool. I think a lot of things that really reflected the beauty of the gospel in YWAM were aspects like community and fellowship, and it just was so cool to kind of arrive there and already be a part of a family in a lot of ways. I think some of my favorite moments in YWAM, and I'm going to spoil it for people, so don't show this to people if they're going to YWAM Maui, but YWAM Maui had this thing called Exodus, which was right at the beginning. When we got there, we basically slept, and then in the morning we're told, like, hey, we're going on a huge trip, pack your bags. We had like a packing list of like the essentials. It was like one pair of underwear and like one shirt and one pair of jeans, and like that was it. Like you weren't allowed much. And we got on a bus, not a bus, like white vans, went all the way to the other side of the island and camped in the rain for a full weekend, where we spent the entire weekend sharing testimonies with one another and only eating oatmeal or ramen for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every night. So that was, in a lot of ways, like a really great way to kind of get broken down right from the get-go. We were all hangry. There were a lot of things that just kind of really broke us to the core of who we were. There were no walls, you could say, and just get to know each other on a deep and personal level through hearing one another's testimony. So, that was really cool, and I appreciated that could be integrated so quickly rather than maybe halfway through our lecture phase, because then the rest of the lecture phase, which was about 3 months, was just learning about God in a closer fellowship with one another than had we done that later. So I'd say it encouraged spiritual growth and faith, because there was just so much opportunity for you to be talking amongst one another, to be going on your own time to read the Bible and everything like that. There was always something to do on the weekends that just really encouraged this, I'd say, like Christ life. It was cool. I think a lot of Christianity, which most of us don't realize, is there's such an emphasis on community and living amongst one another, and loving one another and being there for one another. And so I think like YWAM does like a great job of ensuring and encouraging that. But it was also cool to have people come in and to train us and teach us exactly kind of what God is all about, and different aspects of Him too, right? We'd have themes throughout every week of our lectures, and it really, if anything, didn't help me in a lot of ways understand through the speakers, but it almost, I would say, like provoked me, and in a good way too. But they weren't afraid to ask the big questions and then not give you answers. And I think in a lot of ways that really frustrated me for a long time, until I realized I really need to make these conclusions on a lot of these different questions that are raised, such as free will, predestination, or problem of evil, problem of suffering. What does God say about women in the church, and can they lead, and everything like that. And so these questions, none of the speakers went ahead and said, like, this is what I believe. And I think now looking back, if I had heard them say their thoughts and beliefs on on those certain topics, I certainly would have adopted them as my own. And so what they did instead was ask the question, kind of poke around and give kind of arguments for both sides, and then left it up to us as the students to kind of make those decisions on our own. But yeah, I'd say, yeah, once I got home, things almost kind of fell back into a regular routine before pre-YWAM for a little bit there. It took me a while to understand that some of these habits I developed in YWAM, such as simple things like doing my chores without being asked, or maintaining, I don't know, like good laundry habits or whatever. Like these kind of things, definitely you learned in YWAM because it was almost a mandatory thing, but it was never posed as that. It was just something you did. Like we had an expectation as a household of like 66 living together in the same kitchen or whatever, that if you use a plate and forks, like you're going to clean them and put them back dry. Otherwise, like someone else is having to deal with that, and it's just disrespectful to them. So now that I come home and I don't have that same expectation nearly to the extent that it was at YWAM, I'd say like it was very easy to fall back into that old routine. But right away I noticed quickly that just through kind of living in such contrast, right? So I've got this like pre-YWAM life, and then a YWAM life, and then going back to the pre-YWAM life. I noticed there was like those two shifts of changing. There was like almost a longing to kind of live my life the YWAM way, and I don't mean to say like, oh, that's specific to YWAM, but I'd say like a lot of the things, the routines that I had in YWAM were so good, and it took a lot of contrast and understanding like the way that I was living life not in YWAM was not beneficial, wasn't fruitful. So I'd say coming home, I think the hardest thing was longing for that routine that I had at YWAM again. And the best way I can describe kind of what that's looking like is almost by explaining that I knew, it's hard to explain, but it's like I had this standard in YWAM that I just kind of jumped into and hit right away. But when I got back home, I was like back here, and it almost felt like I was working my way back up to making routine, praying, worshiping, reading my Bible, even doing the chores and whatnot that I just didn't really enjoy doing, and getting back up there. But it felt like a uphill battle when I got home, especially because I knew what it was like, and it should have just been so easy to kind of integrate that into my home life, but it really wasn't. For me, it felt like I had to really work up to that spot, and I'm glad that where I'm at now is I would say quite similar, if not better than YWAM. In terms of routine, I've found out how to kind of adapt, because my schedule is always changing, whereas YWAM's schedule is very stationary. And so in a lot of ways, I felt like that really got better, but I had to work for it once again. And so I'd say I had this period of my life after YWAM where it just wasn't like that, and so that in a lot of ways was frustrating. And I think it was good though, because I longed for a life of routine, just spiritually. I think the biggest thing was that relationship that I had with Christ, and it wasn't necessarily because YWAM is like the only place where God's presence resides, but certainly I was there to seek God's presence, and when I came home, I just didn't have that same mindset, so I needed to bring that YWAM mindset into my regular life mindset. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, post DTS, I'd say my life is different in a lot of ways. Contrary to what a lot of YWAMers would say, I think my DTS was revolving a lot around conflict resolution. Part of it, I'd say, majorly is reason because I don't have siblings. My mom and I barely fight ever. There's just not a lot of incentive for me outside of YWAM to have learned conflict resolution, but put me in an environment where I'm living with 20 other guys in one household. We got triple bunks and double bunks in there, and even on my DTS, my outreach, was probably the hardest thing for me, because we were all out of our comfort zones extremely at that point. We're all, just eating spicy food and not enjoying how it's coming out, and among many things, we're frustrated and we're just so uncomfortable. I'd say a lot of us are just kind of who we are at the core. We can't afford to put walls up, if that makes sense. So when we got to a point of like argument or disagreeing on ministry techniques or anything like that, it really got on our nerves quickly. And if we didn't deal with some of the conflict that arose because of that, I would say then it would snowball and would get out of control too quick. And so having come from an environment where I remember, going to school every day, and if there was just someone that I had a problem with, I would just avoid them until it went away. Or I'd come home and I'd play video games and I'd just kind of escape that reality for a little bit. But having been on a team, and this once again, especially in outreach, I was in close quarters, in close contact with all of these people 24/7, and whether I liked it or not, like I had to learn conflict resolution in a very real way. That worked where my heart was good and their heart was good. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, those problems would snowball. They'd get out of control. And to be honest with you, when I look back, like I think some of my teammates might not like. I don't even know where they're at with everything. But I can tell you certainly that I learned a lot about conflict resolution on my outreach. That the whole ministry was good. The contact that I had with the people in Bangladesh where I went was also phenomenal, but it was actually like internal affairs, mostly with my teammates. That was one of the biggest things that I'd say was a takeaway from my YWAM. So like that wouldn't necessarily be the biggest challenge from YWAM, but it would definitely be the biggest thing that I learned from YWAM. And that's good coming out, because now I have problems with people, and whereas before I'd say I would almost like turtle away from any problems. Like I'm more willing to approach them and address them right away, so that they don't become something bigger in the grand scheme of things, right? And that allows me to work my best with those around me in all areas. So this is with work too. I take these things that I learned and I apply them to work, to my leadership position in church and other things like that. And yeah, so that's pretty good. And I guess, for people who would want to know a little bit more into YWAM, I'd say if you're genuinely seeking and curious, doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. It kind of does, but I would say like YWAM is a great place to go and to learn, because the first 3 months, if anything, you're submerged into a Christian culture. You get to see firsthand how people love one another, grow with one another, treat one another, and those are essential things, I think, when you're testing the faith. And not to mention 3 months you're just learning about God and who He is and the characteristics. But yeah, the outreach part, that's where I would recommend maybe not going if you're not in faith, just because outreach is meant to be a place where you are sharing your faith that you believe boldly. So I just think for any Christian, especially, that's wanting to know more and dig deeper, it's a great place to get out of that routine and seek and discover. So yeah, I think that's everything that I want to share, but I hope that's somewhat helpful to you, Rebecca. And yeah, that's it on my end.